And then I finally got into Moffitt Cancer Center, which is a comprehensive cancer center here in Tampa, generally considered one of the top 10 cancer centers in the US. And I went in to see him. He was like, "Are you looking to just have me advise your oncologist, or do you want to switch your care here?" And I said, "No, I want to switch my care here." And he said, "Okay, well, just do me a favor, make sure that you communicate that with them that you're switching." And I said, "No problem. I got no problem doing that." But then he told my wife, I told him what I was on, the full Fox for a couple infusions and then the full Fury for a couple infusions. And he said, "Well, I'd probably put you on full Fox," but he goes, "You're pretty young overall. You're, outside of the cancer, you're healthy. We have a combination of the two that is full Fox Fury that is much more aggressive, has a much higher success rate, but comes with much more intense side effects." And I just looked at my wife right then and just said, I like shook my head yes, and she shook her head yes. And I said, "Let's do it." And we did that. And I was on that for almost 6 months. But that was like, I remember towards the end of that 6 months, I was telling my wife, like, I don't know how much more of this I can do. Infusions every 2 weeks. I always tell people I have like 11 to 12 bad days. And then I have like 1 to 2 okay days. And then I'm back doing it again. That's what it felt like, honestly, during that time. But then as soon as I started getting some tingling in my fingers, he said, we're taking the oxaliplatin out. That's the ox part of all this for if people are listening and don't know. And we're just going to put you on full Fury. And I said, "Okay, great." So my infusions went from about 6.5 hours down to like 2.5 hours without that. Yeah. And I was on that. But during that first 6 months, I had joined a group, an online colorectal cancer group. And one of the things I learned was about liver transplants. Now, this is going back, 5 years ago. Liver transplants, there was only 14 centers in the US doing them at that time. There was less than about 20 patients who had gotten them because they're very selective in who they choose to get a liver transplant for colorectal cancer. And but I heard about it, and out of all the other treatment options that I had educated myself on and become aware of, it was the only one that I saw that could be a viable option for me to get the cancer out of my liver, outside of just being on chemo and hoping. But everybody at the time, from everything I read,
Yeah.
my team, everybody told me like the chemo is not going to get rid of all your cancer as a stage 4 colorectal cancer person.
Yes.
So it will just prolong your life. It won't cure you. And so I was like, no, I want to be cured. I don't want to just prolong my life. And so I reached out, started pursuing the liver transplant shortly, within those first 6 months. And then it took like another 6 months to actually get to a point, because you need to be on treatment, good, active treatment, and respond well to your treatment in order to qualify to be a potential candidate for a liver transplant.
I have one kind of foundational question before you keep going. The foundational question is, I know you described stage 4 metastasis early in the conversation, but if you are a listener, you're not familiar with colorectal cancer, you seem laser focused on the liver. Was that the only place in the body it had metastasized outside of the colon?
Yes. My colon was almost completely closed off with the tumor, and my liver was covered in tumors. That's why I wasn't like an option for like ablation, resection, any of those things, because my tumors were all over my liver. I mean, I had a PET scan early on, and I always like to say it was like a Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. All the lights, were lit up on it. And for people that aren't familiar with the PET scan, that's what it does. It just lights up where there's active cancer cells on your body.
So Tim, let me just make sure we give our audience a little bit more context, right? So your liver is lighting up like a Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. The colon seems to be, I think the word you used was fully blocked. Did I hear that right?
Well, it was almost fully blocked. That's why they had to put a stent in. I was fortunate enough where I didn't have to get an ostomy bag, but I was able to get a stent. He actually gave me the option when I went in that same afternoon. "Do you want a bag or do you want a stent?" And I said, "Well, you're the one who does this all the time. I know nothing about this. What would you do if it was you?" And he goes, "Oh, I'd go for the stent." And I'm like, "Well, why are you even asking me? Just give me the stent then, And that's what he did. But I will say this, just because we're bringing up the stent. After about my second infusion, I had naturally passed the stent when I was going to the bathroom. And I remember calling that first oncologist and asking him if there was something wrong, or did I do anything wrong, or, is this okay? And he goes, no, actually, it's very encouraging that the tumor shrunk enough to allow it to pass. And so a lot of times, in the cancer world, we talk about scanxiety and everything. I never really had that because I kind of had that indication that the chemo was working on me. And so I just believed that and kept that in my head. Like, it's working.
Keep
Just,
going.
you're going to get a good scan. That's how I was.
That's pretty impressive. I work with a lot of, we help thousands and thousands of patients across the country at this point, and like, I think that's really impressive. I think it's very, I think hope and true positivity are not the same thing. And it sounds like you had kind of passed hope and were in this like truly positive mode, which I think it's a hard place to get to. So kudos. I definitely did not get there while I was on chemo, for what it's worth.
No, I always joke around with people that, I don't say this lightly because it did, as I told you, took me over a decade to get to the point where I was at when I was diagnosed. If I had just started it when I was diagnosed, I would not have been the same way. I know it for a fact. I would not have been. And I'm not saying that, like, just because I was this way doesn't mean like everything was positive, everything was hopeful. I mean, there were moments where I just was so down, but I just kept reminding myself, if I focus on that, I'm taking away from the opportunity that I have while I'm still here to be with my wife and the people that I love. And so just focus on the time that you have with the people that you care about, and don't focus on how bad it feels or where this is going to take you, because you don't control that. You control right now, right here, what you're thinking. That's all you have control of.
So Tim, I guess I have two things I'd love to unpack with you. One is at the moment of the stent versus the ostomy bag, there's this moment of you effectively deferring the decision to the oncologist, right? And yet there is this, fast forward a couple months, you are finding this treatment option that is relatively uncommon. 20 people in the world, 20 in the US at least have done it in 14 centers. How do you go from this moment of like deferring decision making to effectively taking it over and driving it?
Well, I think that, as soon as I got into this, right after I started my chemo, I started understanding that I was hearing all these people tell me that I had limited time, very small chance of even like living 5 years, all this negative stuff, but they're all statistics. They're all facts, as far as statistics go. But then I was in all these groups, online colorectal cancer groups, and I'm meeting people who had lived 5 years, who were stage 4, who were beating it, who, some survivors that were stage 4 that were 10, 15, 20 years into their survivorship. And I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. That was just where my mind went, and it's hard to explain, but I just was like, they were like the hope part that you were just talking about. They were my inspiration and hope.
Yes, I really appreciate you saying that. But my question is a little bit deeper than that, right? So I see this across a lot of cancer types, partly in the metastatic setting, right? Almost regardless of whether it's breast or colorectal or lung, it's the presence of a survivor, thriver, someone who has kind of beaten the odds, and access to them tends to be the anchor, right? Where it's almost like I have an example that I can model after. But there is something below that though, right? There is this, you're modeling after it, but there's also this capture of control, for lack of a better word, around driving the treatment decision.
Yeah, I think what really drove this point home to me was, one, a lot of these people didn't just go by the conventional treatment options.
Yes.
They got other treatment options. The second point was, since I had colorectal cancer, I will literally say colorectal cancer was a pain in the ass for me, because for those first 6 months, I literally was bleeding. It was painful to go to the bathroom. It was painful even to sit on the couch. I mean, my wife would buy, I can't tell you how many bags of Epsom salt for me just to soak in the tub and give some relief on my butt, And what I went to the ER once and I went to urgent care at my cancer center twice for this. Nobody was able to tell me what it was. My labs were fine. One time they did a CT scan. Everything looks good. I went to see, my daughter had a baby and she had a tear and everybody wanted to give her a colonoscopy. And that's not what it is. I had a baby. I need this taken care of. She saw a proctologist and said he was amazing. And I said, who was that you saw? And I went to go see him. And before he even looked at my butt, I told him my situation and he goes, Tim, it's probably hemorrhoids and possibly fissures, which are little tiny cuts.
Yeah.
And as soon as he told me that, and I got relief like almost instantly when he gave me the injection for my hemorrhoids, like the light bulb went off in my head. I got the best oncology team, I feel like, who I'm seeing, who never once looked at my butt, but that's not their job, right? Their job is to treat my cancer.
This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The opinions of the speakers are their own and do not represent the opinions of organizations they're affiliated with, nor do they reflect the opinions of Manta Cares Inc. or Manta Cares' sponsors.